granting us this interview here at ecdq.tv. You became the Archbishop of Washington in 2006. When you took possession of the Archdiocese, what was the biggest challenge you had to face?
Well, I think the challenge there is the challenge that we're facing all over, I think all over North America, and the challenge in a large part of Europe as well. The challenge of telling this generation the story of Christ, introducing them to the person of Jesus Christ. I think there is so much energy being spent today on so many things. People moving in all kinds of directions, distractions, that we don't always make time to think and to open our hearts to the really big picture, our relationship with God. So I think the challenge of the church today, the challenge of a bishop today, of any pastor today, is to call people to realize each one of us has been invited into a personal relationship with God, that we are called to that we need that. We really can't live a fully rounded human life if we exclude the spiritual quality, the spiritual dimension of our existence.
So this is one of the reasons why you've made catechism, so the teaching of new generations, like also older generations, so to teach them about the reality of Christ and its message.
I think that's one of the focal points of my ministry. It's been that for 22 years as a bishop, because without Christ, without someone hearing about Christ and inviting Christ into his or her life, that person can go through life with a great emptiness. And I wouldn't want to be responsible for not having told them, offered them this experience of Christ. Today, that's one of the major tasks of the church. We're a voice. We're the voice historically, theologically. We're the voice of Christ and his gospel. But there is so much noise and so much competing voice, activity, energy in the world, that the task of pastors today, our work, is simply to keep saying over and over again to this generation and to some of the young adults, a generation ahead of this generation, take a look again at Christ and see if he isn't the answer to what in your life is missing.
But many people will say, I have everything I need. I have food, shelter, I have my career, and some people are just not receptive to that message. What do you have to say to them?
I understand that dynamic very, very well. People can tend to look at the now. But as we get older, our vision tends to broaden and even to deepen. And we begin to realize this isn't everything. There was an advertisement once, years ago, on local television, and it showed these young people sitting around having a wonderful time. They were drinking beer, and the advertisement was, "It doesn't get any better than this." And I remember a number of my students at the university saying, "It better. It better get better than this. This can't be all there is to life." I think that's why the church has to stand in the midst of the community, just like Christ did all those centuries ago. Stand in the midst of the community and say, there's more. There's more than just what you have and see now. And that more is so enriching. It's God's love in your life that will give meaning, a whole new depth of meaning to your life.
We're gathered in Quebec City this week to celebrate the Eucharist, gift of God for the life of the world. And on this special year for the United States, the elections are coming soon. And it's a time, we feel that it's a time that for America to look at itself and say, where are we going as a society? And some people say that the American society is a little bit divided between the rich and the poor, maybe even different cultural groups. And what can the Eucharist bring to America for its future?
Well, what this Eucharistic Congress does is lift up for us once again a message that is so profound, a message that we all need to stop and listen to. It's a message that says, even with the richness of the pluralism that is a part of our culture, there's also a unity. That what the Eucharist brings to the world is a communion with God, and at the same time, because of that communion with God, a communion with one another. We have an answer to this enormously complex human question, how shall we live? Ultimately, isn't that the human question? Everyone asks that question. How shall I live? What value shall I follow? What's the purpose of my life? And what the Church holds out for us is the perennial vision of Jesus Christ. How shall I live? Live in communion with God, and therefore in peace and harmony with one another. And because of that, some of these inequities, some of these injustices will begin to be diminished. But it'll never happen if we don't recognize that without God, we're simply incomplete.
As the Archbishop of Washington, when you say something publicly, how political can it be, or can it be interpreted as?
Well, there's a certain sense in which living in the nation's capital and living in that part of the world where everything is seen through the lens of politics, there's a sense in which no matter what I would say or do, there will always be a political tone to it. What I have to do, what every bishop has to do, in my opinion, is not get involved in the partisan aspect of politics, but to lift up the perennial human values. Our Conference of Bishops in the United States just recently published a document, Forming Conscience for Faithful Citizenship. That's the title. I like to think that that's my work in Washington. Not telling people how they should vote. That's their responsibility. But my responsibility is to help them form their conscience, so that that conscience, rightly formed, conforms to that law written in our heart. Every human being has that law of God written in his or her heart that says, this is right, and that's wrong, and here's how you should live. And it's the task of the Church to form that conscience, to be the conscience for the nation.
I know this is a personal question, but when you met the President, George W. Bush, did you talk about that with him?
He's a person who speaks very, very openly about his respect for the Catholic Church and the Catholic Church's teaching on the natural moral law. In fact, in his comments at the White House when Pope Benedict XVI visited, it was the President who initiated the conversation by talking about the great value that the Church is in our community, precisely because it holds up these issues, these moral values. Yes, he talks about them, and it's a theme of conversation that you can have with him without any problem.
He was very receptive to.
Yes, because I believe what we're seeing is, and this again is reflected in the public statements he's made, we're seeing an appreciation of something that is really foundational to the life of our institutions in the United States. And I believe that's probably and equally true in Canada. The founding documents presumed that there was a moral order. They presumed that there was a basic right and wrong that was normative for all of the rest of our actions, laws, institutions, policies. That was true because the founders of our nation, the people who wrote those documents, were profoundly convinced there is a natural moral order. It's the same thing that after the Second World War, the whole world turned towards to say, what would be the norm for assessing what are crimes against humanity? What is right and what is wrong? And the response was, there's a natural moral order. It's written in our hearts. And so I think that's something that our age has to once again look at and reappreciate.
Well, the United States have been engaged in Iraq for many years now, and Canada is in Afghanistan with the United States. And many Catholics in Canada believe that it is not our place, and as Catholics, they don't agree with the idea of war. Can you be Catholic and serve your country if this country is engaged in such a war?
Well, one of the things that we deal with when it comes to military activities, while all of us, every one of us, is called to evaluate the situation, those that have the responsibility for civil government, those that have the responsibility, elected officials, are the ones who have to make the actual call. What is to be done? What do they feel is justifiable? In a free society, we're still able to speak out against it if we disagree with it, and we're still able to work to have that situation changed. That's the whole idea of free speech and a free political process. It's one of the benefits of living in an open democracy. And I think that's what we recognize. There will always be calls made by those who have the responsibility for civil government. There will be calls made that we would disagree with. But we're able to address those in an orderly manner.
Great. As my last question, I would like to ask you about the impact that the visit of Pope Benedict XVI had on the clergy in the United States.
The visit, I think, was a moment of grace, and it's going to be a milestone in a renewal in the Church in the United States. From the moment he arrived on through the entire time he was there, it seems as if Pope Benedict never stopped smiling with a warmth that characterized his pastoral care for the people, not just in the United States, but for the people on this continent, for the people around the world. What came across was a loving pastor. And I think what our priest saw was not only what should we be saying in imitation of his message, but how should we be saying it? He not only spoke clearly, faithfully to the Church's tradition, but he did so in a positive, caring, loving manner. I think many, many of our priests, many bishops, myself included, see in him an example of a shepherd, a pastor, caring for his flock, and doing so in a way that the flock knows that and is responsive to him.
Archbishop Wuerl, thank you very much for answering these questions and for granting us some time here at ecdq.tv.
Well, it's been my pleasure. Thank you very much. It was wonderful to be here, wonderful to be a part of this extraordinary Eucharistic Congress. Thank you.
Thank you.